Hello, today in our series on Africa's business leaders, we're in conversation with Professor Kingsley Moghalu, the President and Vice-Chancellor of the newly formed Africa School of Governance. He's a visionary leader whose work is shaping the future of governance and leadership in Africa and is spearheading an initiative that aims to redefine leadership across the continent. With a distinguished career that includes serving as a deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, as an academic at prestigious institutions like Tufts University, as well as an advocate for transformational leadership, Professor Moghalu brings a wealth of experience to his current role. Under his guidance, ASG has set out to empower the next generation of African leaders with a unique curriculum rooted in both global academic standards as well as African realities. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So, ASG has been described as a transformative institution. I wonder if you can share with us the inspiration behind establishing this School of Governance and what your vision is in terms of its role in shaping governance on the continent.
Well, thank you. The inspiration behind the establishment of the African School of Governance, ASG, came from or to the co-founders of the school, President Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, and His Excellency Hailemariam Desalegn, former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, which is a BRICS member, by the way. So both leaders came upon the inspiration that major problem afflicting the African continent and standing in the way of its development aspirations is the problem of governance. The ability to organize the internal spaces of African countries to be stable, to be prosperous through productive economic activity. So this requires, a certain level of leadership, which is evident not very much in supply in the continent, and a certain mindset, plus the skills and the knowledge to be able to tackle the things the continent is facing and the opportunities that it also has in the 21st century. So this is the inspiration that led to the establishment of the African School of Governance. And so first of all, they set up the African School of Governance Foundation, the ASGF, and then the foundation gave birth to the African School of Governance, ASG, which is an independent university of public policy that is accredited.
What do you see as the main challenges regarding leadership that the continent is facing, and how can institutions like ASG address those challenges?
There are two main problems that leadership in Africa faces, or three actually. The first is a lack of understanding of what leadership actually means. In too many countries in the continent, there is a conflation of leadership and authority, leadership and power. So many people who are in positions of political power interpret leadership as power and authority alone, but not as responsibility and service. So this misunderstanding of what leadership means. Leadership is a vision, having the ability to have a vision to move an entity from where it is today to progress, over time, inspiring, motivating, galvanizing, mobilizing. This is what leadership is. But instead of focusing on these leadership requirements, too many leaders in Africa focus on power for selfish purposes. So this is the first problem of leadership in the continent. The second major problem is the absence of a mindset that Africa should solve Africa's problems. There is too much of a seeking after external validation. There's too much of a seeking after external props. And so you find many African leaders, they're running around looking for foreign investment. They're running around looking for aid, but they're not focusing on organizing their internal society to be prosperous, to be stable, and to be productive. No. So you are, in a sense, then, trying to invite investors into chaos. So this is another major problem. Another problem is then the matter of the competence, the skills, the knowledge that is necessary. You need a very good knowledge of political economy. You need a very good knowledge of things like corporate governance, risk management, strategy, economics. Too often, this kind of knowledge, African history, where have we come from? Where are we going? Too often, this kind of knowledge is also lacking in the people who make decisions. So there are various other problems, including the nature of state formation in Africa, the colonial experience and how it led to states being formed, different disparate ethnic groups and ethnic nationalities being put together in one country. And this leads to identity politics at a very extreme level. And this prevents unity, which is what drives development. And so we need leaders with a worldview that rises beyond the things that divide us in African countries and focus more on a philosophical foundation and a vision of a purpose around which we can be unified. So these are some of the problems of leadership in Africa. And so the ASG is very consciously designed to address all of these problems. That's why we start from the question of mindset formation, the question of views, which is what drives civilizations and great changes in historical epochs. We see the worldview of the Western world. We see the worldview of China, the worldview of the BRICS, rising in a way to moderate the hegemony of the West. So this whole question of strategic intent, strategic ambition internally and then manifesting externally is very, very critical. So we will be training our students not just on technical subjects, but also in this philosophical understanding of the world, and then the knowledge and then the skills.
All right. I think you might have given me some clues in terms of my next question. My understanding is that ASG aims to blend global academic standards with African insights. And I guess that this is what's going to distinguish this institution. What kind of graduates then will this produce in your view?
We will produce graduates who are confident in their African identity, who are confident and have a worldview, that Africans can solve Africa's problems. And this is because they will learn not just Africa's challenges, but also Africa's opportunities. And they will learn in an African-specific context. For example, we have many homegrown innovations in governance across Africa that we'll be studying. There'll be case studies. There's going to be a center for homegrown innovations in Africa. There'll be a center for, trade and Pan-African integration. There'll be a center for African history and leadership. And there will be a center for technology in governance. So we are going to be driving an African narrative while also studying other parts of the world as well, and whatever insights we can get from that. But there's going to be an authenticity in the average ASG graduate that you don't find too much of today.
You yourself have had an impressive career in governance and academia and policy. How do you think your experience has shaped your leadership philosophy, and how you're going to apply this work at ASG?
Well, thank you. I feel extremely fortunate, to bring the kind of background that I've been privileged to have to the ASG president role, because it's a role that requires a combination of things. It requires intellect. It requires understanding of the world of academia. It also requires an understanding of policy and the practical world out there, because the ASG is a policy school, which trains people to do, first to think and then to do, and so having been a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, having been a professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, having been a senior United Nations official, and having been a CEO of a private, having been an entrepreneur, and then running a think tank as well. So all these things have combined to equip me in a way that I consider myself really fortunate to drive the ASG's agenda and the vision of the co-founders of this institution forward to actual realization.
So ethics and ethical leadership, I think it's something you can teach to know what it is, but it's another to instill it so that it becomes innate or a part of a leader. How are you going to do that?
Well, there are two ways to handle the matter of ethical leadership. Teaching it is very important, because without teaching it, people, do only what they know. So if you expose them to the knowledge of ethics and why it matters to lead in an ethical and transparent way, the difference in outcomes between people who lead ethically and people who lead corruptly, and the implications for societies, I grasp it. The second aspect is that, we will lead by example we do and the things we say and, the work we try to do. So, because sometimes they say monkey see, monkey do, and so we will teach and we will do as well. You see, in countries where leaders are ethical, it's easier to fight corruption. The problem with fighting corruption in Africa is that there are too many leaders who are corrupt and they're advocating against corruption. But everybody can see them and see that they live corrupt lifestyles. And so it's not easy to persuade people when you are not an example yourself. And of course, accountability is very important in teaching people ethical leadership. People have to know that there are consequences for, unethical behavior.
So recruitment is underway to find your first cohorts in terms of students. How are you going to make sure that you get a diverse group that's inclusive of the kind of future leadership that our continent requires?
Yes, that's very important. First of all, our first requirement for admission to ASG is excellence. Academic excellence, professional excellence, excellence in character, because we are looking mostly for mid-career professionals to come into ASG. That's the main profile of the cohort we're looking for. Now, but of course it's important for ASG to be diverse. And so we're looking to get students from as many of Africa's 54 countries as possible, if possible 40, 45 countries. That's what we're targeting. This means that communication of ASG's existence and its ideals and its mission and its vision across Africa in the languages that they speak, even though our language of instruction will be English. But there are many people in Francophone Africa who can study in English, in Lusophone Africa, in Arab Africa. And so, for example, as president, I will be commencing an Africa tour to promote student recruitment in the 5 regions of Africa. So we're bringing ASG over the next 3 months to the face of people in North Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa, and Central Africa. So this is how we intend to go about recruiting our students. Of course, we're opening on February 1, the portal on the website. Of course, the world today is a world of technology. And we're going to be mounting a digital campaign to attract students to apply to enroll at ASG. So we expect to start our master's programs, our MPA, Master of Public Administration, in September 2025.
You've often talked about transformative governance. I wonder what that means in the African context and how you hope to instill this kind of mindset at ASG.
The first thing is to let Africans know that they are God's children too, and that they deserve a place under the sun, and that they themselves can create that place. As you make your bed, so you lie on it. And so we are going to be driving the narrative that Africa needs to be far more ambitious for itself. The level of poverty, the level of unemployment, the level of conflicts in the continent are just too high for the continent to achieve its development aspirations. And we're going to be, teaching and advocating to policymakers, because we're not just focused on students. We are going to have a policy studies directorate that will be like a think tank, pushing out our research, pushing out our advocacy to the people who make decisions in the continent or about the continent. And so we are going to be making this point. Look at Asia and how it has risen. Why can't we also rise? Why can't we also claim the 21st century as an African century? So I think this evoke a sense of pride. We need to bring up a chip on our collective shoulder that we've been down for too long. Whereas in history, centuries back, was up. We have not always been where we are today, but global history happened. And they say, Winston Churchill said, history will be kind to me because I intend to write it. We want Africa to write its own history going forward. And we will do it starting from the ASG. So over the next 10 years, we're going to create thousands of graduates with a certain worldview and a certain level of capability, mindset, skills, knowledge, purpose-driven leaders. This is what will bring transformative governance. Because governance that is transformative is governance that achieves practical outcomes that improve the lives of citizens in African countries. That's what transformative governance is. And for you to achieve that, you need to have strategy. And for you to have strategy, you need to understand strategy and how it works. You need to be able to manage risks. You need to be able to understand corporate governance and apply those principles that the public sector uses to make profit and to stay prosperous. The private sector uses to achieve profits and stay prosperous. We need to apply it to the public sector in African countries. Often, you find that the private sector and the public sector spaces are like, oil and water. And if the public sector is weak, the ultimate potential of our private sector entrepreneurs will not be achieved. In which case, whatever success they make today is in spite of the government, not because of the government. You see, we have too many governments in Africa without governance going on. That has to change. That's where transformation will begin to come.
So what we know is that our continent is the youngest in the world in terms of population demographics. And so with that, it's a rich resource, but youth development and youth empowerment become a critical thing for us. How is ASG going to look at this, both from leadership and also the leadership that's going to do the developing and empowering?
Well, that's the point. This is one of the most distinctive features of Africa, the population of young people, and even the growth of that population of young people. We're going to be creating scenarios. There's going to be the super story where the young people that Africa has become skilled, become knowledgeable, are able to create wealth for themselves and for their populations. That results in a super story. But there's also the other scenario in which if there continues to be bad governance, you will have a lot of youth unemployment, which is already very high today. And it will get worse and worse. and become a youth bulge and become a social problem and ultimately a security problem. That is a dark scenario. We will paint these two scenarios and teach our young people and our government officials to make a conscious choice of the super story as an outcome by 2050.
Professor, this is the BRICS Africa channel, and I've got to ask, with that in mind, we're part of a global grouping now. Many of the countries on the continent will also be joining this grouping. And I just wonder, as developing nations from around the world, what are you going to be teaching at ASG? Yes, we're African, we must think African, but we're also part of a global order, one that also requires some change.
Yes, of course. I mean, we will be teaching about the world, but we will just be teaching it from an African perspective. That's the point. And the BRICS, are an important part of the emerging global order. I think it has, I don't know if it's, how many countries? 13 countries or so. Yes, and some African countries are members already. So we will be teaching the implications of these kinds of dynamics and how global orders rise and fall throughout history, and how Africa can reshape itself to be part of a world in which it is a prosperity sphere. So we are very conscious of the progress that has been made in the BRICS countries. We are very conscious of their impact in international relations today. We will be teaching international relations at the ASG, and obviously will be an important part of that. We'll be teaching global political economy, and the BRICS will be an important part of that learning, as well as other, orders like the G7 and all of that, the UN and then the African Union and Africa's regional economic commissions. And the importance of intra-African trade definitely will feature hugely in ASG's teaching and curriculum.
Professor Moghalu, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so, so much indeed for having joined us on the BRICS Africa channel, and we wish you and ASG the very best.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.